In 1966, Ford decided to make a supercar that would eventually crush Ferrari in the 24-hour endurance race of Le Mans. And what the story ever told you that the movie in 2019 was based on the true rivalry between Ford and Ferrari, and the car that almost made the success nearly wasn't even dropped in. That was the story of the Ford GT40 race car, and this is how the movie portrayed it. So, what exactly is the Ford GT40 race car? Well, it's simple. The Ford GT40 is actually an endurance race car built by Ford, engineered along with Carroll Shelby and legendary race car driver Ken Miles. But what did I ever told you that sometimes maybe you were right about Ford building a race car against Ferrari, and the movie told you something wrong. Ken Miles did not actually win Le Mans, and all of that was true. The Ford GT40 wasn't also built by Ken Miles because he was only the one driving the race car. But then, maybe you realize that those details were mixed up by accident. Shelby wanted 3 wins, but what made us realize that the Ford GT40 race car nearly failed, and this leads to a backlash for Ford to cancel it for almost 64 years. And ever since the 1966 24 hours of Le Mans, maybe had a far more different story. So let's talk about the quirks and features of the Ford GT40. The Ford GT40, also going by the name, the GT40 race car, was a race car made by Ford and Carroll Shelby. The engineering of the Ford GT40 was handled out as a 6-speed manual transmission race car powered through a Ford 427 small block V8, also known as something else, the Ford small block. The Ford small block only made about 480 horsepower, and what that mediocre number ever told you is that the Ford GT40 wasn't meant to go fast at all. In fact, the first prototype of the GT40 race car had actually failed, which leads to Ford's disruption of winning Le Mans was so close. Their victory against Ferrari was soon going to be a disaster and an end to Ford. So what did Carroll Shelby do? Well, it's simple. Collab with a former British soldier going by the name Ken Miles. Many people had heard the story of Ken Miles as a race car driver, but what did I ever told you that Ken Miles had suffered a fate right after losing against another team with this kind of car? The Ford GT40 may have succeeded in Le Mans, but Ken Miles, he was robbed from victory. And what I never told you is that Ford versus Ferrari was based on a real story of motorsport racing events. And that motorsporting event was at 24 Hours of Le Mans. Here's what the story gets even wilder. The Ford GT40 was having losing streaks against Ferrari's race cars, and since Ferrari was mocking Ford out of it, Ford had something else in plan. What if they made the GT40 race car more powerful, stronger, being able to dominate against Ferrari's power? And that was true, because Ken Miles knew exactly the philosophy of the Ford GT40 has worked. The philosophy of the Ford GT40 is that the car needs to be lighter, faster, stronger, reinforced. It needs to fight like a fighter, not just a race car. And that's when Carroll Shelby realizes that what if that detail was right? What if the Ford GT40 wants to go faster than normal speeds? And it would shock the whole racing world upside down on its knees. The GT40 race car creation was finally successful. It managed to break Ferrari's grip on the first place line, and all three Ford GTs won the race. However, Ken Miles was robbed from victory, and McLaren, well, he was also congratulating Miles because Ken Miles knew the sport better than his own grip. So, what exactly happened after 1966? Well, it's simple. Since 24 hours of Le Mans was still going underhand, there was something else that Ford versus Ferrari never told you: the J car death incident. During that practice, Ken Miles was tasked to drive the new prototype called the J car, a recreation that to the Ford GT40 race car. However, things took a dark turn for the worse. The car had oversteered right off the ledge of the race course and flipped upside down, causing it to burst into flames. Not only did the car exploded, because what happens next was truly terrifying. Ken Miles was thrown out of the vehicle and died. And that's when Ford versus Ferrari took a dark turn. It wasn't just about motorsporting revelations. It was about reveling true greatness but soon caused disaster. The J car was a death trap, not just because it was fast, it was uncontrolled and unsafe. Drivers were warned not to touch the J car or drive around the racetrack with it. The story of the Ford GT40, from being an unsuccessful failure to now becoming one of the most famous race cars in American history, soon became America's first mass-produced supercar that has ever been made to dominate 24 hours of Le Mans. In 2005, they brought the GT name back, but not as the GT40, but only as the Ford GT. And soon after that, in 2019, Ford vs. Ferrari was in the making, and the GT Le Mans edition was finally released after the movie. In 2021 towards 2023, the Ford GT40 became a success right after a near hiatus of almost failing Le Mans. But the J-Car death incident of Ken Miles was disastrous. Not only it became a disaster, but it became the memory that everyone had felt right behind their backs. The creation of the Ford GT40 was long, enduring, and when it came to Ford versus Ferrari, that's when everyone tells you something. You can't deny success without even thinking straight for once. And that's what exactly Ken Miles was. He wasn't just a driver, he was a badass. A badass attitude that always thinks about pride and possession. And when possession becomes passion, it just became something far different. The GT40 doesn't become a race car, it became the symbol of pride, passion, and rivalry against the challenges of the odds. When destroying Ferrari, that's when Ford realizes they had one reputation. Build a reputation of their own against Ferrari. The Ford GT40, the story that has to take place after a failed attempt to win against Ferrari. But then, legendary Ken Miles was the one driving. And that is the story of the Ford GT40 race car.